We will be in Isaiah chapter 14 today, if you'd like to open your Bibles and turn there with me. I want to begin this morning by reading for you from a book I have that I use for my own personal devotions, and I seem to be referencing this quite a bit lately. But the book is called The Valley of Vision, a collection of Puritan prayers and devotions. So someone went along and gathered together a bunch of Puritan prayers, devotions, and compiled them into one book. The very first one is called The Valley of Vision, and I'd like to read it for you. It says, Lord, high and holy, meek and lowly, thou hast brought me to the valley of vision, where I live in the depths but see thee in thy heights. Hemmed in by mountains of sin, I behold thy glory. Let me learn by paradox. The way down is the way up. The way low is to be high. The broken heart is the healed heart. The contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit. The repenting soul is the victorious soul. To have nothing is to possess all. To bear the cross is to wear the crown. To give is to receive. The valley is the place of vision. Lord, in the daytime stars can be seen from the deepest wells, and the deeper the wells, the brighter thy stars shine. Let me find thy light in my darkness, my life in my death, thy joy in my sorrow, thy grace in my sin, thy riches in my poverty, thy glory in my valley. This week we begin a two-part sermon, and to that I say you're welcome. It didn't start out that way, but called The Valley of Vision, and we're going to cover several chapters here. We'll start in verse 14 today. We'll go through chapter 19, verse 15 today. And what we see here is this, and I want to begin by making kind of a summary statement for these next 2 weeks, if you'll look with me at your notes. And the summary is this, is that it's God's gracious intention that he will humble the pride of men, that in their valley they may look up and see that he alone is exalted. It is only in a valley, it is only in a low place that we're able to look up. If we are already high, where is there to look? But when we are low, we look up, and what do we see is the only thing in the heights, but God alone. And so God graciously sends us to the valley that we might look up and see him exalted. That is what I hope to show you in the text these next 2 weeks. The valley is the place of vision. I want to read for you out of Isaiah 2, just 3 verses. Isaiah 2:12, I just want to remind you of these. Isaiah 2:12, the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low. All that is lifted up, of course, in the minds of men and the hearts of men, will be brought low. Why? Because he alone is exalted. Isaiah 2:17, the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, the lofty pride of men shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. Also Isaiah 2:22. This is God's call to the people of Judah. The remnant of his faithful people, he says this, stop regarding man in whose nostrils is breath. For of what account is he? It is our tendency continually, if not in ourselves then in other men, to see them as greater than who God is. We tend to exalt ourselves. We tend to exalt other people and powers. And God says, stop doing that. Can't you see that in the nostrils of man is only breath? And we might ask, well, what else is supposed to be in there? Is there breath in the nostrils of God? He doesn't need it. You see, man is a created being and God is the creator. He alone is exalted. We ought to look to him and not to man. So we look at our text, chapter 14, starting in verse 28. And it says, in the year that King Ahaz died, came this oracle. Oh, thank you very much. In the year that King Ahaz died. Now, let's pause right there just for a moment and set up what we're looking at here. We remember everything we are reading here has an historical setting, right? This isn't a fairy tale. This isn't a children's book. This isn't just stories, but this is real. And we need to be reminded of the historical context here. In the year that Ahaz died, what happened? When the king died, another king took his place. Who was the king that took his place? Well, it was his son, and his son's name was Hezekiah. So Hezekiah begins to reign as chapter 14, verse 28 and following is being written. So a new king comes. Who is this new king? If you remember, when we first started the book of Isaiah, we did a little review of the kings. Who was Hezekiah? Hezekiah was the only king referenced where during Isaiah's lifetime, the only king that was truly faithful to the Lord. All the others were completely wicked, setting up high places, especially Ahaz. We remember what Uzziah did. He came into the holy place and he made a sacrifice thinking that he was great, and God humbled him, struck him with leprosy. Remember that? And then Ahaz was doing terrible things, and he sought the hand of Assyria to help him, and he dies. And so Hezekiah, his son, begins to undo everything that his dad did. And by the way, Hezekiah was only 25 years old. In the first year of his reign, the oracles to the nations are written that we're about to look at. It was the year about 716 BC. 2 Chronicles 29:10 tells us, now it is in my heart, this is Hezekiah, it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, in order that his fierce anger may turn away from us. Was the fierce anger of the Lord on Judah? Well, yes, because they were being wicked and they were being led by a wicked king. And so it was in the heart of Hezekiah to turn things around and to say, I will not lead the people of God into a wicked place, but instead towards obedience. And so, again, he began to undo all that his father had been doing. He set back up the temple. He cut down all the high places, and he began to restore things the way they should be. Now, in the 4th year of his reign, that is 4 years later, after this is written, 4 years, so the man is 29 years old, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, takes down Samaria, which is the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. So what happens when he's 29 years old, been reigning as king for 4 years of the southern kingdom of Israel? The northern kingdom of Israel is destroyed and led away as captives to a foreign land, to Assyria. And of course, what does he think? I'm next. I'm next, right? In the 14th year of his reign, 10 years after this, so now he's 39. He's a little bit seasoned now. He's 39 years old. Assyria comes against Judah. 10 years after the northern kingdom is taken, now the southern kingdom, his kingdom, is under threat. And they come and they surround Jerusalem. Assyria surrounds Jerusalem. No way in, no way out. Let's just let them starve, and eventually they'll get so wearied that we can just go and take them easily. Right? Pretty good plan, really. In the 14th year of his reign. 2 Kings 18, you can go and read about this in more detail. 2 Kings 18:13, in the 14th year of the reign of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. 2 Kings 18:20. Now this is the man speaking on behalf of the king of Assyria to Hezekiah. Okay? So the king of Assyria, the bad guys, he sends a guy and says, say this to King Hezekiah. Say this to him. Do you think that mere words are a strategy for power for war? In whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me? Who do you trust? Are you still trusting in that God of yours? Don't you see all the kingdom I've brought down? And now it's you. You're nothing. But yet you say, oh, I trust in God. You just need to realize that that's going to do nothing for you. Just give up already. 2 Kings 19:19. Hezekiah's prayer. So now, O Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know you. O Lord, you are God alone. And he does. The Lord hears the prayer of Hezekiah and delivers the people. In fact, the Lord sent an angel to strike down thousands of his troops. Realizing that power, the king of Assyria goes back to Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. But we know that that time didn't last, that eventually the people of God were taken by another power, Babylon, and they were taken into captivity. But here is where we find ourselves. The threats are coming, but they're not there yet. We've looked into the future a little bit for him. We know that days of distress and torment of his soul are coming because a threat is coming down on him soon. And so in the first year of his reign, God begins to prepare him and the people by delivering to him oracles to the nations. Now, here's what we also need to say before we begin looking at these oracles. Excuse me. There's two types of oracles here. Excuse me. Two types of oracles. First, there are oracles called decision oracles. Decision oracles are God's counsel for the people. That is, the people of God ask God a question seeking out wisdom. Lord, what would you have us do? Okay? They're asking. Like casting lots and receiving an answer was a decision oracle from the Lord. There was no judgment for sin here. There's no future predictions given here in decision oracles. They were simply the people of God asking wisdom from God, and God gave them an answer. Now, there's a different type of oracle, which is the type of oracle we find here that we're about to read, which is pronouncement oracles. Pronouncement oracles are God's desire for the people. That is, God is certainly judging sin, and he is giving future predictions. So, really a lot different than decision oracles. God is saying, here's where you're wrong, and here's what's going to happen. The other kind of oracle is, you ask me a question, here's the answer. So what we have here is pronouncement oracles. God is saying, here's where you're in the wrong, and so here's what you better do. Now, the great question we have here has to be, why are there pronouncement oracles given for other nations, foreign nations? Because let's be reasonable. We are about to read here several oracles to surrounding nations. Now, Zach, show that map if you would, please. Here's what it looks like. Man, I was having such trouble finding a map of the cities during the time of Isaiah, and so I ended up making this one, and so we'll use it for the rest of our time through Isaiah. So here's what we have. In yellow, we have Jerusalem. That is the capital city of Judah. And all the cities you see in white are the cities that we're about to read the oracles to. You notice they're all surrounding nations around Jerusalem and Judah, okay? So it's not people far off, it's people near, okay? That is very, very significant. What is God's intention in giving an oracle, let's say, to Moab? An oracle concerning Moab. Well, let's look at where Moab is. Moab is south of Judah, not part of Judah, a different nation, the Moabites. Now, there's an oracle concerning the Moabites here. Okay, why is there an oracle for the Moabites written to Judah? It wasn't written to the Moabites. It was written to Judah, an oracle concerning the Moabites. Why would God do that? Because isn't the purpose of pronouncement oracles that the people of God would hear where they're in the wrong and change? Yeah, exactly. So who is this for? Who is meant to change? The people of Moab? No. God didn't give prophets to Moab. He gave prophets to Judah. So let's write this in your notes here. God's intention of these pronouncement oracles is that his people would hear and change their ways, not the people of the surrounding nations. So, for example, when we read the oracle to Moab, it's not God's intention that the people of Moab would hear and that they would change their ways and be better Moabites. No. The intention is that the people of God, the people of Judah, would hear what God would say to Moab and that it ought to affect Judah in some way. What does God have to say to Moab? Okay, I hear it. Now, how do I live differently? Okay, so that's the question. What is the message that God would have his people hear about these, from these oracles in history? And of course, our other question is, what is the message that God would have his people hear from these oracles today? I believe it's the same message. So let's look this morning at 5 of these nations, 5 oracles given. You have them listed there in your notes. And we're going to do a summary of each of these passages to the different oracles of the different nations. So let's start first with Philistia. Chapter 14, verses 28 through 32, a pretty short one. We can go ahead and read that as we get started. So it says, in the year that King Ahaz died, came this oracle. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you. The rod that is struck, that is broken, from the serpent's root will come forth an adder. Its fruit will be like a flying, fiery serpent. We've talked about flying, fiery serpents before. The firstborn of the poor will graze, and he will lie down in safety, but I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant I will slay. Wail, O gate, cry out, O city, melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you, for smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. Now look at verse 32. So this is all to these people, to the Philistines, but what would God have Judah hear from this? Verse 32. What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge. In her the afflicted of his people find refuge. So here's why this is significant. It says, in Zion the people of God find refuge. Why did it say that exactly? Because sensing that there was an Assyrian threat, the Philistines tried to make an alliance with Judah. And they said, hey, if we join forces, I bet you we can knock out Assyria. Let's get together and let's take them out. We'll be better off if we join forces. Will Judah trust in the alliances of the nations, or will they trust in God? That's the question. Will Judah trust in God to deliver them single-handedly, or will Judah trust in an alliance they can make with another nation? So the question is this. In the time of your distress, Judah, or you, where will you find your refuge? For Judah, the question is, where you find your refuge in making alliances with other nations? Will they help you? Are they going to be your support? Are they going to be your shelter? Or will I alone, God, be your refuge and your shelter? What is your strength? What is your hope? Who is your perfect shelter? Doesn't this have significant implication and application for us today? In the time of your distress, where do you run for shelter and comfort? That's the question. Isn't that pretty plain? Where do you go? Do you console your own soul? Do you run to substances? Do you run to friends? Do you run to people? Where do you run for shelter in your time of distress? Who or what is your place of refuge? What God wanted the people of Judah to understand: your only refuge is in me. I am the only one who can shelter you. I am the only one who can give you the help that you actually need. Don't you realize all these other things are broken anyway? I am your refuge. I am your shelter. But it is only when we are in distress that we need to look for shelter, isn't it? It is only in the valley that we look up for help. It is only in distress that our heart is tested to say, now, where will you run for help? Where will you run for refuge? Run to God. To him alone, the perfect shelter and refuge. What would God say to Moab? Chapter 15. In chapter 15, starting in verse 1, all the way through chapter 16, verse 14, if you look over that with your eyes, the Moabites now are running from the Assyrian threat. You see them going all over the place. They're running, they're crying out. Moab, it says, is undone and laid waste in verse 1. In verses 2 and 3, it says there is weeping and there is wailing. Also in verse 5 and verse 8, weeping and wailing. In verse 4, we see their souls trembling. The pride of Moab is being cut down. Their response is to weep. Isaiah 16, verses 6 and 7 is what I want to read for you out of that. Verses 6 and 7. We have heard of the pride of Moab, how proud he is, of his arrogance, his pride, his insolence, his idle boasting. He is not right. Therefore, let Moab wail for Moab. Let everyone wail, mourn utterly stricken for the raisin cakes. For raisin cakes? For raisin cake. You read that right. Raisin cakes. I think this is to bring out the absurd nature of their torment. The question that's being asked is this: in the time of your distress, where will you find your tears? That meaning, what was Moab so upset about? Why was there torment in their soul? Why were they weeping and wailing? Why were their souls trembling? Because their pride was cut down. Their pleasures were lost. Raisin cakes. Evidently, they loved their raisin cakes. No more raisin cakes for you, and so you cry. No more vines producing wine. But you continue to read, that's what it says. All their vineyards are laid waste. All the things that they tried to produce out of their own efforts were bringing about nothing. Their pride was broken, their pleasures were lost. And so for that, it brought torment to their soul. Psalm 10, verse 4. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him, and all of his thoughts are, there is no God. I'll also read 1 John 2:16. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And so when those things are robbed from you, what happens when your soul loves them? You weep, and you're in torment, and your soul melts because your pride has been cut down and your pleasures have been lost. Isn't this a great question for us? Where will you find your tears in the time of distress? Because in your time of distress, for many of us, does it not bring tears? Trembling, a melting soul. The question we have to ask, why the tears? What are you crying over? Raisin cakes? A job? Your strength is lost. The knowledge you thought you had has been humiliated. You thought you had something and it was taken from you. Your pride was cut down. You were insulted. And your soul melts. Now, in your time of distress, should you weep? Yes. But here's where our weeping should come from. Our weeping shouldn't come because our pride is cut down. Our weeping shouldn't come because our pleasures are lost. Our weeping ought to come because of sorrow for sin. That's my weeping. My tears are out of sorrow for my sin. In the valley and in your distress, what ought to melt your soul is not, I lost a job, I lost a person, I lost whatever it is. The torment of your soul is sin, even in death. Who is to blame for death? Sin. Do you see? Sin is the problem. We weep and we are broken over a broken, sinful world. My broken, sinful heart, my broken, sinful soul. That is my source of weeping. Not because I lost something. Not because my pride was hurt. But because of sin. It continues on to say, chapter 16, verse 14, that there's a prediction given that in 3 years, Moab will be taken. God said, before I've made threats against Moab, and he said, and now is the time when Moab will pay. 3 years from now, Moab will go. And they did. Taken by the Assyrians. Don't you see there's a connection here between God's desires for his people and fulfillment of predictive prophecy? If I brought that to pass, don't you think I'll also bring judgment to pass on you and your soul? Or do you think that God alone is able to manipulate history and bring things to pass, but he won't judge me for my sin? There is a connection between God's desirous will over you for obedience and the fact that he continually shows that he can fulfill predictive future events, future prophecy, right? We are able to look back on time and say, God said he was going to do that, and look, he did it exactly how he said. Now, he said he will judge sin, and he's going to do it just like he said. Don't think you can escape. In the time of your distress, weep over your sin, not out of some earthly pleasure lost. That's nothing anyway. What did God say to Damascus? Chapter 17, verses 1 through 14. Damascus is the capital city of Assyria. Of Syria. That's significant to remember. It says Damascus will be brought low, reduced to just a remnant, like the people of Israel. And they now will be dissatisfied with a life of nothing but grief and pain. And if you read those 14 verses, you will see that there is nothing but grief and pain listed. Excuse me. Look at verses 10 and 11, chapter 17. And here's why. Here's why God wants them to hear this. For you have forgotten the God of your salvation and have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Therefore, though you plant pleasant plants and you sow the vine branch of a stranger, though you make them grow on the day that you plant them and you make them blossom in the morning you sow, yet the harvest will flee away in the day of grief and incurable pain. The question is, in the time of your distress, where will you find your hope? In the time of your distress, where will you find your hope? That is, what keeps you moving forward in your time of distress? What is it? If we had no reason for moving forward, wouldn't we all say that we would stop moving forward? And isn't that the fate of some, actually? Is that there is no hope. We create hope. Say, things will get better. I just know it. They'll come around. They'll call me back. Something will happen. Something will happen to make things better. You keep hope alive in your heart. The question is not, do you have hope? The question is, what is the source of your hope? On what are you hoping? Nothing you produce with your own hands can give you hope for the future. Nothing you produce with your own hands can give you hope for the future. Do you already know that that's true? Has that truth already resonated in your life? You've already come to figure that out? I've already seen it happen time after time. As soon as I get things figured out, I'm talking to you from my own personal experience. As soon as I get things figured out, here's how it's going to be. Give it about 30 seconds. And it's flattened out, and you got to start from scratch. Nothing I create with my own hands is lasting. Nothing I can conceive, nothing I create will give me hope for the future. I hope that your hope is not in yourself and your own abilities. You create your own hope. I'll get through this. I'll figure it out. I'll make a way. I'll get another job. I'll repair the relationship. I'll do what I need to do. I'll make it work. Your hope is in you and your pride and arrogance. You are not the one lifted up. God alone is the one that is exalted. You are nothing. And in a moment, he will cut you down to the valley so that you can only look up and see that he alone is exalted. For many of you, that's happened. You've been cut down and you lay in the valley. But the whole problem is this, is that when we lay in the valley like we've been thrown in a ditch, we forget that we need to look up. And all we can do is look down and say, I'm in a ditch. But God calls us to continually look up to him, who alone is our hope. You can't put your hope in anything else. You can't get yourself out of the ditch. God alone is your hope. Don't trust in other people and their wisdom and their strength. That's just as bad. They're going to fail you too. God alone is our hope. So look at verse 7, chapter 17. What does it say to do? In that day, man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on who? The Holy One of Israel, our only hope. Who is that? Jesus Christ. Our only hope. Jesus Christ. What would God say to Cush? Let's look back at that. Let's look back at that map. Let's just be reminded of what we're looking at here. There's Jerusalem. There's Moab. There's Philistia up there. Now to the south, he's below Egypt. You see Cush. Now they're a ways away. These are the people that we're going to read about here. Verses 1 through 7, chapter 18. Land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea and vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, a nation tall and smooth, a people feared near and far, a mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. Now we see that river there, don't we? The Nile River. In Cush, which is around modern-day Ethiopia, says they are a modern-day, or at the time, they were a mighty conquering people. They were tall and smooth, which is meant to mean that they are very intimidating figures. They are tall, they are smooth people, they are mighty, they are conquering. They have been heard near and far. This is a great people. And there was a new ruler in the year 740, and he attempted to partner with Egypt and then also to find other alliances in the north because Egypt also hated Assyria. They wanted Assyria to go down. So Cush goes and they talk to Egypt. They say, let's make an alliance. And they continue over the waters. They send messengers to make an alliance. And they make their way up to Judah. And they say, hey, Egypt and I, we're getting together. We're going to take down the people of Assyria. Why don't you join with us? What is the question being asked here in all of this? What is the point? Why talking about this particular nation? The question is, in the time of distress, where will you find your support? Now, this is different than hope because this is not just looking to the future and okay, no matter what's going on, you know what? My hope is in God. That's more of I'm in the ditch, but someday I'm going to get out, and it won't be by my own strength, but it'll be by the power of God. And you know what? If I die in the ditch, at least I'll be raised to glory with him in the end. That's hope, right? Now, support is I begin to get out of the ditch, I begin to crawl out of the valley. On what am I supporting myself as I crawl out? As I move forward, where is my support? The question is, are you going to support yourself on the wisdom and the power and the might of other people? Or are you going to support yourself on the power and the wisdom and might of God? That's the question for Judah. Do you think you have a better chance if you say, well, yeah, I hope in God, okay, yes, but I've got a good opportunity here that I'm going to trust God with my right hand, and with my left hand, I'm going to kind of have a fail-safe. You know, I don't want all my eggs in one basket here. So I'm going to trust in this other foreign alliance that they're going to give me some wisdom and strength and hope, and I think they'll do something good for me. Where does our power and our strength and our support come from? The people who you trust for support will one day fail you, and ultimately one day will die. Did you know that's true? I mean, I'm not saying anything prophetic here. I mean, that's true, right? The people who you trust right now will fail you because they're sinners. They're not perfect, and they will die one day. The same is true for you because you are that for someone else. Someone is looking to you for support. If you say, yes, I will support you, you're setting them up for failure. Because you were going to fail them. And they will fall right with you because they were supported on your shoulders. Now, wouldn't you rather be supported and to show people to support themselves on the shoulders of God rather than the shoulders of yourself? If Judah climbs up on the shoulders of Cush in Egypt and they go down, well, they're going down with them. And by the way, that's exactly what is said here. They're going down one day. You want to support yourself on a people who I am going to bring to ruin? That sounds like a bad idea. Everyone around you will come to ruin one day. Their body will. They won't be here to support you. So where is your support? I want to read two passages for you because there's one seeming contradiction that I want to clear up here. Colossians 1:10 and 11. It says, so walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might for all endurance and patience with joy. So if we need endurance, if we need strength, if we need patience, if we need joy, by the way, that's everything you need. How do we get it? We are strengthened with all power, increasing in every good work in the knowledge of God. Now, we are strengthened according to the glorious might of God. His Spirit at work in us, when we are growing in the knowledge of him, will give us endurance and patience and joy. Do we deserve joy? Do we deserve to be paid? I mean, we don't deserve the things that the Spirit of God produces in us, but yet, when we walk in obedience, this is exactly what we receive. If you need strength, if you need support, do you need a support system? It's not going to be in a little program. This is the problem with many churches today, that they want a pastor who can come and speak life into them as a motivational, self-help speech. That person will fail and they will die. I don't give you self-help or motivational speeches. If I did, man, I'd be terrible at that. I am not a motivational speaker by any means. But I can point you to the one who can give you life eternally. That's the support that we need. We need the support of the Spirit of God inside of us. That's where we rest our support. You rest yourself on the support of God. He will never fail. He will never weaken. He will never die. He will continually support you. He is your only support. Now, I say there's one catch to this, or one seeming contradiction in the fact that I'm almost telling you that don't trust other people. Don't ever rely on someone. Well, Hebrews 10, 24 and 25 makes that a little bit more clear. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near. Now, when you support someone next to you, you encourage them in what way? We look to other people for support, yes, but not your wisdom and your support, your knowledge, your abilities. I don't want to trust in you. I want you to point me to the one that I should trust in. You want to support someone, point them towards God. Don't say, I have a little nugget of wisdom for you. Now say, well, here's what's happening to me. I can tell you about my experience, but sometimes that's helpful. But ultimately, our support is in pointing people towards the one that they should support themselves on. You know what? I can give you some advice, but it's not perfect. And I want you to trust that if when you try this and you fail, if you're supporting yourself on God, then you will never fall. You may fail in this, but you will never fall because you're being supported by God alone. And that's how we encourage one another. That's how we support one another. It's not your wisdom, but it's you pointing people back to God, who is their strength and who is their support. Does that make sense? So when someone next to you needs advice, don't consult some self-help book. Glean wisdom that you can, but ultimately what we need to point people towards for hope for their soul, for encouragement, for rejoicing, is in God. Finally, what does God say to Egypt? Chapter 19, verses 1 through 15. Actually, it should be all the way through chapter 20, verse 6. That should be chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 6. Sorry about that. It says, Egypt will be at war within itself. The Nile will not give its life. Their counsel will be meaningless. They will be oppressed with a fierce ruler. It says in verse 3 that their spirit will be emptied out. It also says in verse 3 that their counsel will be confounded. It says that they will begin to look at their mediums and their sorcerers and all this different type of knowledge, which we know they had, by the way, and you know what? They actually could do something. There was a power they could tap into, and they're going to consult them, and what's going to happen is that they're going to be confounded. There's going to be great confusion, and all the counsel they could produce will be brought to nothing. 11 through 15 talks about their foolishness. Where are your wise men? Princes have become fools. There's a spirit of confusion. It's attacking Egypt and their wisdom. The wise nation of great counsel will be brought to ruin and humiliation and be found out. You were so wise after all. Assyria, speaking to Hezekiah, says this back in 2 Kings chapter 18. Are you trusting now in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff who will pierce the hand of any who leans on it? Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, he will trust in him. But you say to me, we will trust in the Lord God. Is he not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed? Now this guy doesn't understand, because Hezekiah didn't remove the high places of God. He removed the high places of false gods. So this guy's foolish. But what he does say is, I perceive that you trust in an alliance with Egypt and their wisdom. Because there was truth to that. They did want to trust in the wisdom of Egypt. They did see that there could be support there in wisdom. Isaiah 20, verses 1 through 6. In the year that the commander-in-chief, who was sent by Sargon, king of Assyria, came to Ashdod and fought against it and captured it, at the time the Lord spoke by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from your waist and take off your sandals from your feet. And so he did, and he walked around naked and barefoot. That's true. And the Lord said, As my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and a portent against Egypt and Cush, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian captives and the Cushite exiles, both young and old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered in the nakedness of Egypt. And they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush, their hope, of Egypt, and their boast. The inhabitants of the coastland will say in that day, Wow, go back to the map there, Zach. Let's be reminded. Who are the inhabitants of the coastland? Well, pretty much everybody we're talking about. They will say, Behold, this happened to those in whom we hoped, to those who we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria. And we, how shall we escape? If everyone we look to is now gone, where can we go? The question is this. In the time of your distress, where will you find wisdom? For Judah, they wanted to find wisdom in the wise nations of the world, in Egypt, in Cush, and their alliance that they were bringing them. And they thought, yes, okay, you have some good tactics here. Let me see what all you can offer. I want to read for you, and I'd like for you to turn here, because this is where we're going to end today. I'd like for you to turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I want to look at verses 2 through 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 2 through 7. And it says this, For I decided, this is Paul speaking to them, to the church, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power. Pause right there. Okay, Paul is saying, I'm coming to you, not that you might be supported on me and my strength or my wisdom. By the way, Paul is a smart guy, and he had a lot of wisdom to offer. But what he said is, I didn't come so that you might rely on my wisdom. Here's what he says, verse 5. So that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it's not a wisdom from this age, or from the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret, hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before ages for our glory. What is the wisdom that we seek in our time of distress? We seek the hidden wisdom of God, which can only be found in Jesus Christ, in the truth of the gospel. This is what we seek in our time of distress. Do you know what you need in your time of distress? When you lose your job, when you're going through suffering, hurt, pain, whatever it is, when sickness is brought on you, when you're having loss from your home, whatever it might be for you, that time of distress, do you know what you need most? It is not to pick yourself up out of the ditch. It is to look up and say, look at how glorious my God is. That is what you need. You don't need money. You don't need people. You don't need food. You don't need a house. You don't need a job. That's not what you need in your time of distress. Because then you would rely on that thing you received. Right? What do you need in your time of distress? I need the wisdom of God. And I need to look up in glory in the magnificence that is Jesus Christ. If I die in this ditch, I die a happy man. That in my valley, I finally have the vision that I need. And that vision is the glory of God Almighty. Let's pray.